The Florida Gators have hired Jonathan Decoster as the second offensive line coach, wrapping up Billy Napier's staff. And, well, it was a move, I guess. We'll talk about it here on Locked On Gators.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day, we are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. Happy Monday. I'm Brandon Olsen. Find me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with Giants Country and NFL 33. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by Nissan. If you're the kind of driver that likes to push things just a little bit further, or if you've ever wondered what adventure could be right around the next corner, take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada and just go find that next big adventure. Check them all out at nissanusa.com. And like I mentioned, the Florida Gators hired Jonathan Decoster as their second offensive line coach, which that part was expected. The second offensive line coach was kind of the expectation, especially at the time that you lost Darnell Stapleton. You had every other position coach, every other staff spot filled up, except offensive coordinator, an on-field special teams coach, second offensive line coach, because that is a thing that Billy Napier loves and has always loved. He's done it every year except for one as a head coach. And the one year that he didn't was because of extenuating circumstances, because the coach at the time had passed away at Louisiana. And so every year of his career, except for that 1 year, Billy Napier's had two offensive line coaches, and that's an approach that he chooses to stand by, and he's doing it again now with Jonathan Decoster. I'm not going to be the type to really bash on the 2-0 line coach approach. I get it. It's something he likes. He feels that, there's 15 offensive linemen really. So one guy handling all of that responsibility is, a lot, right? Also, I do think that it's important to, when you talk about this hire of Jonathan Decoster, I think it's important to acknowledge that when you have the two offensive line coach approach, you're really limiting the pool with which you can hire from. Because while you may say, hey, there's 15 offensive linemen, we don't want to overwhelm anybody, or it's just really hard to have one coach handle 15 offensive linemen there. And a lot of teams do have a head coach or an offensive line coach and an assistant offensive line coach, but they're not really usually on-field assistant offensive line coaches, similar to how Ryan O'Hara handles quarterbacks, and he's not an on-field coach, which was an option to do that when Darnell Stapleton left. It was an option to promote O'Hara, which could have been a move that would have been very appreciated. But again, regardless of how Billy Napier feels about, 15 offensive linemen's a lot for one coach to handle, which it is, most offensive line coaches handle it anyway. But with Jonathan Decoster, I gotta say, like, usually I can talk myself into most hires, right? Gerald Chapman, young coach, but he's got good reputation around. He's been an on-field coach bit. Good, yeah. A lot of rave reviews for him. Will Harris, same thing. Jonathan Decoster has been an on-field coach with 1 year in his career. His resume is, at least in my opinion, fairly unimpressive. His resume, 2013 to 14, he was a graduate assistant offensive line coach for Nevada. 2015-16, he was the offensive line coach / recruiting coordinator / strength coach / travel coordinator for West Virginia State University. 2017 to 2019, he was the GA with tight ends at LSU. 2020, tight ends coach at Old Dominion. 2021, Cleveland Browns offensive quality control coach. 2022, the offensive assistant is when he got hired at or when he got promoted there, Cleveland, or moved, I guess, to offensive assistant with the Cleveland Browns, where he's been. And that's about it. not assistant offensive line coach, just an offensive assistant. They did have offensive line coach and Bill Callahan, and assistant offensive line coach, I believe it was Scott Peters with the Cleveland Browns this year. So Jonathan Decoster was at best third in command, which you could argue here, although he's the offensive line, co-offensive line coach, assistant offensive line, whatever it may be, he's going to be second in command to Rob Sale. It's just a really inexperienced move who hasn't been in the recruiting realm in a few years. I mean, like when he last recruited, NIL wasn't a thing. And I understand that there's the argument. Shannon Snell, who Florida Gator legend, has been on this show before. He said, NIL and winning are the two main recruiters here. Relationships get you in the door, but really, so much of NIL and winning are what drives it home. And sure, you could make that argument. However, you could also make the argument that Jonathan Decoster doesn't really have the relationships. And on top of that, not really someone that necessarily gets you in the door in a new place. DeCoster played at Louisiana. Obviously, a lot of this coaching staff has experience coaching in Louisiana. Coached at LSU, still just Louisiana. Sure, South Florida ties, but you're the University of Florida. You have ties to the state of Florida. So he didn't really get you in the door somewhere new, unless you want to talk about West Virginia, I guess, because he was at West Virginia State. But even then, really? Not so much. So this is just one of those hires where I need to see it before I'm bought in or sold on it. And again, there's a lot of hires that Billy Napier's made of young coaches that are relatively unproven, but have strong reputations where they've been, and I can get a gauge on that. Jonathan Decoster, we don't really have that right now because he hasn't really been an offensive line coach, non-field coach. So it's kind of hard to really say that he's proven doing anything at this point. And again, I'm all for taking a swing on a young coach that you think's really promising. But year 3 and a make or break year for this coaching staff, it seems like a really risky move. And again, I think the two offensive line coach approach is one that kind of limits your pool because you're not going to have a lot of guys that are willing to split that duty. But man, this is easily my least favorite hire that Napier's made this offseason. Maybe my least favorite hire Napier's made since he got hired at the University of Florida. And I'm not meaning to kill the hire or bash it too much. It's just one that I really am struggling to wrap my head around. I reached out to a few people that have played under Jonathan Decoster, haven't gotten a response on that, which is not unexpected. But even then, not expecting a ton back because, again, at Cleveland, he was at best third in command. And I will say that he was around Bill Callahan, and that is going to be like Bill Callahan's widely regarded as one of the best in the business as developing an offensive line. And sure, Jonathan Decoster got to see that up close and in person, but it's very different to just see something and be able to actually implement it yourself. I'm not saying that he can't, but this is very much one of those hires where I'm going to have to wait and see before I'm bought in at all. I'm sure we'll hear things out of camp. But man, it's a rough one for me. Like I said, it's just one I can't really wrap my head around right now. And I get it at this point in the year. And given the current state of the program and by that, I mean the job security issue, and given the relationships that they may have, given the two offensive line coach approach, your hiring pool is relatively shallow. But this is one where honestly, I kind of wish they would have just gone like, all right, we'll promote O'Hara or we'll hire Joe Houston as a full-blown special teams coordinator, not an analyst, whatever it may be. But hey, thinking about the worst hire, or in my opinion, the worst hire, the least favorite hire, I was also thinking about the best hire, which we will get to in a minute. If you've watched this show, you probably know who I'm going to say here. It's not much of a surprise. But before we do that, we are going to need a quick word from Nissan. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by Nissan. If you're the kind of driver that likes to push things a little bit further, and if you're always kind of looking for, what adventure is next for me right around the corner, our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. And I live in New York, which means in New York City. So city drives are kind of always what we do, and great escapes, they're everywhere. When you're in New York, you can go to Jersey. Upstate's got beautiful scenery, if we're being honest. But class exclusive Google built in is always your updating assistant to call up on almost anything, really. And gone are the days of sitting there connecting your phone and the whole you have to be parked to connect your phone, or you have to be stopped and at a red light. I'm putting the car in park to connect it real quick. No, not an issue anymore. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and the Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system, so it's easy there. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect mid-size crossover for your next adventure. I prefer mid-size. I'm not trying to get something huge. Like I said, New York City, parking ain't easy around here, all right? There's a lot of people, and I get it. Most people take the subway, public transportation. It still ain't easy around here. I just want to get that one out there. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Thanks again for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to the podcast and on YouTube. And like I said, like Jonathan Decoster, I'm a very much wait and see on that. I don't like the hire. And I'm not trying to be overly critical. I realize that too. Like, for those of you that are like, recruits are going to see this and then change your mind. Here's the thing. One, if recruits are searching for Florida Gators media, there's going to be a lot less positive people than I am. But also, if they're searching, they probably want all the context, right? And this is just more context. It's my opinion. They don't have to care for it. You don't have to care for it. But it's my opinion, and it's how I feel. And if recruits are looking for it, then so be it. But also, I promise you, recruits aren't like, you know why I didn't go to Florida? Locked On Gators. That ain't how it works. But if you're a defensive recruit, congratulations, because if you do commit to the University of Florida, you're going to be at least seeing a little bit of time with Ron Roberts, who I think is the best hire that Billy Napier made this offseason. One of the best hires that Billy Napier has made throughout his tenure in Gainesville. And I know that a lot of people know I'm a huge Ron Roberts fan, have been for years. That's a big thing for me. It's just, I want to hammer that home. This is not me going, oh yeah, I'm in on the hire. I think Ron Roberts is a phenomenal coach and doesn't get the respect he deserves. The respect he deserves, I guess, just from a casual standpoint. Ron Roberts was hired to be the linebackers coach after Jay Bateman left to be the defensive coordinator at Texas A&M. Obviously, he was also hired as the head coach of the defense, which for a lot of people, they hate that. I don't understand it. I get where you go, oh, like we have a coach to coach our coaches. Yes, sure, if you want to look at it that way. However, you have a coach that helps take responsibility off Billy Napier, which is a thing that everyone said that he put way too much on his plate. This helps do that. That's a big selling point also. And Florida's not the only coach that has a head coach of the defense that's meant to just, handle the defense there. So I really don't hate it. And I think that I feel like it's one of those things where it's like, oh, it's new to Florida, so I hate it. And that's not how things work. But I'm a huge fan of this hire. And I do think that when you look at how young this defensive staff is, and I talked about this last week, and someone was like, oh, well, Mike Peterson's not that young. He's still relatively young for a football coach. So he's still relatively young, and he's relatively inexperienced in just a grand scale of things. So when you look at Gerald Chapman, Mike Peterson, Austin Armstrong, Will Harris, you add Ron Roberts there, and it's like, yeah, that's a ton of young guys that Ron Roberts has been coaching for 30 years. You've added 3 decades of coaching experience to your defensive staff as the head coach of the defense to help coach up the rest of your assistants. You've done that now. Like he's going to make an impact on every level of the field, not just the position that he's coaching. but the other position coaches will be made better because of it. And I think that alone is enough to justifiably say that he was the best hire this offseason. Like, you could talk about promoting Russ Callaway to co-OC. You could talk, which, by the way, more responsibilities. Yes, I think a lot of us care less about that hire or about that promotion if Russ isn't calling plays, which we don't know at this point what's going to happen there. We're looking at the hires. Obviously, I think most of us are not going to put Jonathan Decoster as the best hire of the offseason. You have Gerald Chapman, could be up there. Tulane's defensive line did absolute work when he was there. Will Harris could be up there. I think one of the best things about Will Harris is that he's an incredibly active recruiter right now, getting you in the door with a lot of guys at least, which, again, you could feel how you feel about NIL and winning being the ultimate deciding factor. Will Harris is doing his part here, at least early on in the recruiting trail. But I think looking at Ron Roberts making that impact at every level of the defense as the head coach of the defense makes him the best hire, especially again, 3 decades. Like, he's been coaching longer than some of these guys have been alive. That's insane. But he's also an innovative defensive mind. And I know that a lot of people don't necessarily think that or don't necessarily know of that because you go, oh yeah, like he's been at Baylor for a few years. He was at Louisiana before that. He was at Auburn for a year and whatever it may be. But go back to his Delta State days, and he brought a lot of this defense, the tight front, which we'll talk about the tight front at some point this offseason. We'll talk about the tight front. It's going to be something that you're probably going to see more from Florida, which I do think Florida Gators fans will very much like and enjoy. So we'll talk about the tight front there. But he brought in tight front creepers. Like, those are the big principles of Ron Roberts' defense that everyone knows. Like, those are the key words, the hot words. When you talk Ron Roberts, you go tight front, keepers, and you get to talk about just what he's done at Delta State. And people look at Patrick Toney and Austin Armstrong and they go, oh, Patrick Toney's 1 year at Florida wasn't a good defense. Austin Armstrong's 1 year at Florida wasn't a good defense. Sure, don't write Ron Roberts off because of that, because you also have to consider, I mean, the big selling point for Ron Roberts is that Dave Aranda, the current head coach at Baylor, championship winning defensive coordinator at LSU, Dave Aranda is from the Ron Roberts tree. Pete Golding, believe he won a national championship with Alabama, if I'm not mistaken. SEC champion with Alabama. Pete Golding, currently the defensive coordinator at Ole Miss, which is going to probably have a pretty damn good defense this year when you consider everybody they brought in from the portal and year 2 under Pete Golding. Also, that Ron Roberts tree. So yeah, the defensive coordinators who each had 1 year at Florida didn't do awesome. However, Patrick Toney, by the way, has been killing it with safeties at Arizona. I've heard very good things when we were at the Senior Bowl. I was talking with people on Cardinal staff, not Patrick Toney. He wasn't there to my knowledge, but talking to people, and they were just like, oh, he's awesome. I almost said a word I'm not allowed to say on the show. But Ron Roberts, for me, is the best hire. Do you think that he's going to help Austin Armstrong kind of speed up Armstrong's development as an SEC defensive play caller? Because that's always the thing too, where people are like, oh, you got someone to coach your coaches and make your coaches better. You're mad about that? Austin Armstrong's calling defensive plays whether or not Ron Roberts got hired. You brought in someone to help make him better. If you're mad about that, you're just wrong. There's no other way to put it. You're just wrong. If you're mad about bringing someone in to help improve your coaching staff, you're just wrong. Opinions can be wrong, by the way. And if that's your opinion, congratulations on having a wrong one. We do have to talk about basketball because this team is going to be the death of me. Before we do that, though, a quick word from FanDuel. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And yesterday, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but it was March 3rd. And so yesterday was a holiday. It was Trey Day, which 3-3, get it? Yeah, fun stuff. And Trey Day was a beautiful day, at least on FanDuel for me. And don't worry, if you missed Trey Day, it's okay. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed with any winning $5 bet. $150 if your bet wins. Just visit fanduel.com/locked on and shoot your shot. Remember that FanDuel is an official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever you listen to podcasts. And we're wrapping up today's show talking about Florida Gators basketball because on Saturday, well, first off, on Friday, we had Isaac Shade here of Locked On College Basketball, Locked On Tar Heels, to talk about this Florida Gators basketball team to end the season, talking about this Florida Gators basketball team, looking at the SEC tournament and March Madness. And then on Saturday, Florida Gators went out, had a solid lead at the half over South Carolina Gamecocks on the road, and then choked it like they always do. And I have to say that this team, although they had more success, like Todd Golden in year 2 had more success than Billy Napier in year 2. I don't think you could argue that. However, this team, although they've had more success and they're better than the football program has been under Napier, Todd Golden has a few key traits that taken years off my life already. Specifically, 2 things. One, blowing leads. I mean, it's offensive. The amount of times that a Todd Golden team has had the lead at halftime by double digits and then barely squeaked out a win or lost the game drives me absolutely freaking crazy to watch that consistently. And it's things that even I can see, and I'm not a big basketball mind, but it's things that I can see of dribbling around for the first 25 seconds of the shot clock and then chucking up a panic shot like you're playing 2K, and it's like, oh, shot clock, and you just heave it. It's horrible basketball that even I can see. And then there's also, which is one of the reasons that kind of goes hand in hand with why this team consistently struggles in the second half, the defensive adjustments that other teams make just put the Florida Gators in an absolute blender every time. And we talked about this with Isaac Shade on Friday, where good guard play tends to lead to teams kind of overperforming their expectations in the tournament, right? You look at last year, Kansas State, Marquise Noel, he was the driving factor. You look at the Kemba UConn season. You look at, FAU last year. FAU last year, guards were lights out, and it helped lead to their deep run. Good guard play, like Florida has most of the time. Look at Zion Poulin, and you look at Walter Clayton Jr. That good guard play ideally helps you make a run. However, when you see what happened against Vanderbilt a week or 2 ago, and it was still Florida won that game handedly. However, Vanderbilt switched to a full court trap, and Florida turned the ball over consistently, got panicky, and it wasn't like they put Denzel Aberdeen in and he started making like young mistakes. It was Zion Poulin, Walter Clayton, that you got that full court trap, and Florida just could not respond, and their offense slowed down significantly. Luckily, Vanderbilt's offense is not good, and it kind of kept Vandy out, but Florida's offense couldn't do much. And then you look at, first off, the Missouri game, they figured out the zone for the most part against a terrible Missouri team. But then you look at the South Carolina game on Saturday, and South Carolina switched to a 1-3-1 with about 10 minutes left in the second half. And Florida just folded. Like they folded like a lawn chair. Like that's what it was. They folded like the chairs they use in like WWE. That's what they folded like. It was just completely collapsed. And they had no idea what to do. Walter Clayton he forgot how to dribble half the time. They had to just heave shots. And again, they got lucky with like Zion Poulin shot 1 for 1 from 3 against South Carolina. And it was just an absolute heave at the end of the shot clock. They lost the ball. They got tipped into the back court. Then they pushed it up court, and then they had to just chuck it. And it went in, and you got lucky. But Florida cannot figure out a zone. And it's incredible to just watch them consistently screw the pooch every time that a team gets into the zone or gets the full court trap going. And that is absolutely terrifying because when you get to the SEC tournament, you got Alabama this week, and then you have Vanderbilt to wrap up the season. So you should at least end the season on a win, end the regular season on a win, right? Then you got the SEC tournament, and you have the NCAA tournament, which Florida definitively should be in there. But you have those, and when you're looking at those good teams that are coming in, and those good teams that you're going to face in the SEC tournament and in the NCAA tournament, they're going to watch you and they're going to say, all right, so we switch to 1-3-1 and we win. That's what you're saying. And it's probably going to work unless Todd Golden's been hustling everybody. And he's like, hey, check this out. The entire regular season, we're going to torpedo games. We're going to tank games. Looking like we can't solve the zone. Just look completely incompetent. And then, once we get through that, and we get to the tournament, teams break out the zone, we're going to shoot the lights out. Unless that's what's going on, which kudos to you, dude, if you're playing possum like that. But unless that's what's going on, this is not going to be a team that can make a deep run, even with your guards. Which is not a team that's going to be able to make a run if you can't break a zone. You should be able to break the zone with your shooters. But Will Richard wasn't knocking him down against South Carolina. I think he only shot one against the zone, and he bricked it. And it's like, well, if you make that, then maybe they get out of the zone. Riley Kugel made a corner three, if I'm not mistaken, against the zone. But for the most part, it was just that the Florida Gators were completely incompetent when they went up against the zone. And when you get into these tournament play, when you get into both tournament play, they're going to destroy you with that. Again, if Vandy's full court trap can slow you down, imagine what a good team can do against you. It's going to be hell for the Florida Gators unless they make some big changes. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free wherever listen to the podcast. We'll be back tomorrow, talk more Florida Gators football. For Locked On Gators, I'm Brandon Olsen. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work with Giants, Country, and NFL 33. And as always, I will see you all next time.